We are delighted to have our very own Lorraine McGregor with us today as our guest speaker. Lorraine has been a Unitarian all her life. She's a stepmother to Chris and Natalie, and a sister to Carla. Where's Carla? There she is. Welcome. And a wife to Rob, which makes her a saint. See, everyone knows what I mean. Lorraine and Rob live on Bowen Island, love sailing, and in their spare time help their business owner clients discover profitability, sanity, and value hiding inside their companies. She holds an MBA, is an astrologer, believes in a higher power, and in the essential goodness of people and animals.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning. Good morning. So, Rob, my lovely saint of a husband, and I were on the ferry this morning, and we just gotten on, and I pulled out my speech and flipped through the pages and went, page 3. I'm missing page 3. It panicked in that moment. But I have the kind of husband who leaped out of the car, ran to the back of the ferry just as they were closing the gate, discovered the bus was gone, flagged down a person in a truck, little Mike apparently, who's 75 years old, who drove him all the way back to our house, 20 minutes away, and he found page 3 on the floor of the printing room and hopped on his motorcycle and got back here to deliver it. That man that I'm married to is a true knight in shining armor. How do we interpret the message when life gives us lemons despite our best efforts? Holding out hope for a better possibility can also set us up for massive disappointment. That fall from hope to the pit of despair can leave us feeling helpless, unable to feel confident to try again to get a better or different result. We can lose trust in ourselves and then look for a savior to make it all better again. How we interact with or ignore that shadow that follows all of us who dare to reach, to hope, either paves the way to find the silver lining so we can jump into the next adventure, or shuts the door on new experiences. My thoughts today have been stewing on my back burner for at least 6 years, in the pot of stew called life. I couldn't deliver an undercooked message. I had to finish living it first. My temperature gauge, how teary I got every time Stephen asked me if I was ready yet to book my date for this message. It's a little bit spiritual and a little bit scientific. This month, the theme in our church is the shadow. I think disappointment and hope both live in the shadow for me. How many of you have faced lemons when hoping for lemonade? Maybe you fear disappointment like I do, so you don't allow yourself to reach out for hope very much anymore. What was the last event in your life that didn't quite work out the way you'd hoped? Were you disappointed in the outcome or how you or others contributed? Have you squashed your hope away so you won't find that pit of disappointment again? I want to tell you about my love-hate relationship with hope and disappointment and how it has shaped the decisions I've made in my life. I became acquainted with the sickly feeling of disappointment early, at age 12, when my mother left our family. But I didn't do much digging around in this dirt until about 6 years ago. I joined a writing group. I had wanted to learn more about how to add stories to my nonfiction book. The women in this group wrote fiction, romance, and snippets of daily life. I was writing about how to make a business saleable. We would talk about our writing challenges and then read our work to get feedback. They would share steamy love scenes. I would share how to increase a company's multiple. This particular evening, I remember the room was cold. In the back of my mind, I wondered if I would continue with them. Someone must have picked up the signs I was drifting from the flock. All eyes focused on me. Perhaps I should try writing outside my genre. You know, to find something a little more juicy, entertaining. I looked at the 4 expectant faces and could feel a squirm start to push up my spine. What would I write about that would satisfy this crowd? I noticed I was feeling defensive. A clue that there was more to this topic than I wanted there to be. They all echoed each other. Dig into the depths and pull out something meaningful. Right. Why bother? Because I seem to have lost my passion for my topic. Maybe I needed a creative spark. Another clue. The writing group wasn't really my problem. I wanted to feel hopeful that I could take on their challenge, but rather than feeling enthusiastic about the possibilities, holding myself able, and imagining how to start, I felt something a lot more uncomfortable. What was it that I dreaded? Well, whatever that dread was, this was the place to start digging. I could hear an old adage ringing in my head. Gold always lurks in the shadows we ignore. I tell our clients that all the time. Would I follow my own advice? And of course, I put off that writing assignment. I even managed not to be available for our next meeting. Then one day I was rummaging in a box and came across someone else's tome of wisdom. I could feel my whole body wince as I flipped through the pages. And there it was, page 10. The words I feared the most. I was staring at my nemesis. His name? Hope. I forced myself to read the offender's words. Hope is no more than despair taking a crash course in positive thinking. Hope is bravely smiling doubt. Hope is an imposter. Its promise is only to seduce us into postponing now, greening our deserts with pep talk oasis and plastic shade trees. Hope murders ecstasy by addicting us to possibility. I threw the book down. A flood of memories rained down on my heart. I felt the warrior rise in me to fight these words. I was 29 when I first read Robert Masters. He was a local self-help guru who convinced me that because of everything I was going through, I needed to join his support group. What was so bad back then that I couldn't support myself? Well, for one thing, he said, I was addicted to hope. Well, I had to be. You see, my mother, who never did rejoin our family as I had hoped, was dying in front of my eyes. But she did not allow anyone to acknowledge that truth. If you wanted to visit, you had to pretend to agree with her that she would bounce back and prove to the world she had the power to heal herself with positive thought. I felt like a traitor in her eyes. I did try to hope she was right. Could I trust hope? Feeling out of control and confused there, I tried to exercise greater control in other parts of my life. I was on a roller coaster as the co-founder of a software company, After 4 years of struggle, we were on the verge of getting our first customer. However, we had a very impatient investor. He didn't trust us to get that purchase order. He was threatening a lawsuit and stopped his monthly investment. My team agreed to keep working without pay. The clock was ticking. And I couldn't show them that I was afraid, that I feared that despite all our efforts, this deal wouldn't work out. I needed hope like the desert needs the rain. Should I trust hope? Robert Masters rang in my ears. The warrior in me sprang up again. I was not going to be told that I was being seduced into a crash course of positive thinking. Thank you very much. Not even if it was true. With all this going on, suffice to say I lived every day on a precipice, hoping for better outcomes when the daily reality stung and picked apart my resilience. My daily pep talk oasis was my only defense. Then there was my personal life. My company co-founder and business partner was also my boyfriend back then. So how did he handle the stress and fear that we were going to fail? By having an affair with his best friend's girlfriend, one of our larger shareholders. Not the way I had hoped my knight in shining armor would behave. Disappointment that things weren't working out anywhere nipped at my heels. I guess I could see it coming, really. Kind of like one of those movies that reveals the ending in slow motion. Buddhists suggest when your teacup is full, you can't pour anything new into it. Not any more hope, no sense of control. So life helped me empty my cup. Inside 3 months, the scaredy cat investor jumped the gun and forced the company into receivership. The day before, we got our first purchase order. I dumped my business partner boyfriend and moved out of our apartment. I then had to go to my dad to borrow money so I could buy groceries and pay the rent. But first he had to say, I told you this would happen. Hope didn't win out with my mother either. She finally allowed herself to let go and pass on. How does one make sense of so much loss all at once? Looking back, it was strange how I reacted. I hadn't grown up Christian, but I did feel punished, as if there was some scolding God putting me back in my place. Looking back, I was desperate not to feel small, like a bad girl, but I did. Were all these events evidence that I had overreached? Or did my failures mean I was incapable of making my dreams come true and would be sent back to the wilderness of a dull and small life? As I look back, I now know that when you're starting again with an empty cup and the memories of what was and what could have been, you have a few choices. A, get back in the saddle and start hoping again, remembering that to all life there's a cycle of ebb and flow. Or sit in the puddle so as to avoid never having to go through that crushing disappointment again. Maybe life would have been easier if someone had popped those two choices in front of me when I was busy staring at the wall. But I didn't get that memo. If I had, and chosen the saddle, life might have been a lot better than what I had chose instead. On the heels of these losses, I needed a fix. I needed hope to rescue me from this pit of despair. So what if hope was only an imposter? If I had hope, and I had help to climb back in the saddle, that would mean good things would return me to spring again. One cold February day, I sat between my father and my stepfather at my mother's memorial. It was the first day they had ever met. It was the day after the judge awarded my company to that investor. I was trying to stem the flow of tears so I could read the eulogy with my sister. To calm myself, I looked around the overflowing church in search of someone who wasn't in the same pit I was in. My gaze found that connection. My heart skipped a beat as a new knight in shining armor held my eyes. I felt hope surge again inside of me. Yes, I jumped heart first into this wealthy man's life, desperately believing that he was my reward for all that disappointment, my ticket to a happy ending. But my fairy tale wish was not to be granted. There was Hope, the imposter again. By November of that year, I stood on a blustery corner on a dusty street in Ketchikan, Alaska, facing my enemy yet again. I look back on myself that day and see the disappointment had hardened onto my 30-year-old face. I waited for the bus to take me to the airport so I could fly back to a life I had left in a shambles a scant 9 months before. The wealthy knight didn't show up in time to say goodbye. My annus horribilis, the queen said. I wholeheartedly agreed. So where did I go next? Looking back, I now see that unconsciously, I let all these heartbreaks seep into my being. I wanted to be far away from disappointment. I took the grass is greener approach and detoured to a new city. Not knowing people, I became attuned to red flags, alerting me to danger, setting off internal alarm bells that sounded like clanging trains and train crossing sirens and horns. I would leap out of the way of life and shut down opportunities when anything remotely familiar to any of my past appeared on the horizon. I seem to have acquired some rules. No big fancy business ideas. No knights in shining armor, wealthy or otherwise. No boyfriends who could be business partners. No romantic fantasies. No close ties with family. No believing a savior or a knight was around the corner. No people who could take advantage of me. And the list went on. My rules to live by from now on, all in the hopes of never having to feel disappointment again. The only problem was, I didn't make these rules out of conscious choice. I blindly followed my fear, hoping these rules would guarantee I would never have anything bad happen to me again. Yes, my shadow was driving and he had a job to do to keep me out of danger, so I stayed in control. Because we both knew I couldn't be trusted to manage life by myself. I lived under the shadow of these draconian restrictions and ignored that gold for 10 years. Then I did finally shed these rules, one by one, so I became aware of how limiting I lived my life. But despite my new awareness, my fear of hope and disappointment lay like a wet blanket on my willingness to take risks. I guess my writing group and Robert Masters' warnings acted as the fire starter as I began my journey 6 years ago to understand why I was so afraid of disappointment and hope. I started doing research so I could understand my field. Researchers today know so much more about brain science than they did back when I was 30. For instance, I learned that if an event happens and I interpret that event to mean something, then my brain releases a powerful chemical. Which chemical? Well, it depends on whether I decide I'm witnessing something good or bad, which starts the emotional teeter-totter. My body floods with cortisol when I infuse meaning into an event with fear, like I did when I lost my company, believing it meant that I wasn't capable, wasn't worth investing in. Cortisol is the stress hormone. It lasts for up to 3 years in our bodies. It wreaks havoc on our health. What if I think an event is a good thing? I get endorphins, like when I met my wealthy knight in shining armor, and I thought this meant that I was worthy of being taken care of again, worth loving. The more I learned, the more I saw that my brain, body, and as a result, my life, are controlled by the choices I make. So what about my addiction to hope? Well, anticipating something releases dopamine, which floods us with excitement, kind of like cocaine. Dopamine lasts for 2 minutes until just before we actually get that desire fulfilled. Lots of us are addicted to that rush. Shopping, food, that glass of wine we're waiting for at the end of the day. Hope. For 10 years, I didn't allow myself to have hope or anticipate a future I really wanted. That was verboten. Life gets kind of gray without dopamine. I dug deeper and learned that my longing to feel loved and my actual choices to move away from family left me starving for the brain chemical oxytocin. Oxytocin is released when we seek out companionship, feel expressions of love, and are touched by people we care about. It's how we know we're part of the tribe, joined by a common bond. We need oxytocin to feel safe, to trust, to feel a sense of belonging. To have purpose. When I lost my company, I lost my status in the world. As a president, a founder, an employer, a trusted business person, this loss in status and recognition meant I had massive withdrawal from the brain chemical serotonin. And since I didn't have a husband to give me status, and I spent those 10 years living in the US with only temporary visa status, and worked for myself rather than in the company of others, I never got a steady flow of serotonin either. All of these brain chemicals are the precursors to healthy hormonal balance, to a truly authentic, delicious, and satisfying life. There it was, my answer. Because I was afraid to risk hope in fear of disappointment, I lived in a constant flow of cortisol. I had starved myself from the healthy brain chemicals that would give me the rewarding life I really longed for, my happy ending. I had to change my mental habits and break my rules. My new rules? To know what I want and give myself permission to pursue it. To use my creative talents in pursuit of my dreams. To feel loved and appreciated and give love and acknowledgement. To join and be part of a union, a community. To rise to my strengths so I can claim recognition and status. To accept and trust in the cycle of life that there will be good and bad and everything in between. To allow myself permission to live without interpreting everything to mean something good or bad about myself. As I looked back, and in light of this research, I was staggered by how long it took me to wake up. But little by little, I gave myself permission to have hope and dream again. At age 38, I was fed up with my rules. I created a new vision for my life. A partner, a husband, a home, a family for status, community, and eventually to live up to my strengths. Last year, some of the women in our church gathered together for a retreat. Liz Moffat and Catherine Nicholson, our wise leaders, asked us to share an object that represented a very meaningful time in our lives. I shared this picture board of the vision I chose back at age 38. Every time I looked at this board, I would get showered in good brain chemicals. They would drown out the stress hormone, cortisol, the fear that nothing good would ever happen again. I credit this vision at age 39 to bringing me back to Canada, to family. It's when I met Rob and how we grew our business together. So I decided to share my struggle in case some of you may have skipped the part about making a conscious choice to get back in the saddle of your life. Is there some good brain chemical you are missing that your rules keep you from having? Where have you stopped hoping because you don't want to risk disappointment? Or trust yourself to choose well? Or trust yourself to manage in a way that gets you the result you yearn for? Recently, I felt my old red flags waving with wailing sirens, alerting me that a bad thing could be coming my way. It had been years since I experienced this familiar foe. I felt my stomach tie up in knots. I couldn't sleep. My energy was so low and draggy, even my friends noticed something was up. I found myself making meaning out of anything and everything. I feared I was about to be set up for disappointment again. Yes, I knew this was just my meaning-making machine revving up. My fear yelling at me. So was this evidence that this opportunity coming my way was a wolf in sheep's clothing? Or was it completely benign and the situation perfectly within my control to manage? Well, life and people are never that black and white. But it wasn't until I let all that fear speak up, and so I would listen to the alarm bells instead of squashing them away, that I found the courage to face and then manage the situation. You see, a knight in shining armor has appeared on the horizon. A potential business partner, waving money, making promises. He wants to license our books and all the methods that Rob and I have spent years and thousands developing together that grow a company to the next level and make it saleable. We would be recognized and gain status if we joined forces with this knight. I want this so badly it hurts my head, my heart, and my soul. I don't want to want it. I don't want to hope. Can I trust hope this time? But what if I let the dopamine flow in anticipation, even though disappointment could be waiting in the wings? But what if we do what it takes to make this business partnership work and pull out if it doesn't? No harm, no foul. We would still have each other. I feel the oxytocin overtake the cortisol. But what if? Whatever happens along the way in building this partnership doesn't mean anything about me. I let the endorphins out to play. But what if all our efforts don't work out? Don't let the dream die just because this wealthy knight might not be the right knight. The serotonin calms my soul. Maybe all this opportunity means that this is the day I let my dream live so it's free to fly. I choose to get back in the saddle. I trust I'll manage just fine. I am safe to hope.